Hello everyone, this is JD Calderon and this is Indie Comics Explained. Now, for the last few times I've done this, I've been reviewing independent comic books or trade paperbacks. This time I want to take a look at some of my own work, maybe get everybody familiar with it for those of you who aren't. The book that I'm primarily working on, yesterday when I did my video yesterday, I showed a little bit of Tall Tales. A book I've been working with Daphne Lage on for the better part of 20 plus years. We actually have somewhere we have a trade paperback, or an omnibus actually, about 540 pages that comprises 20 issues worth of work in that. And that is actually the first arc in that story. And we're currently working on the second arc. We have the first 4 issues out, and hopefully within the next few months we'll have the 5th issue out. But this here, what I'm showing now, is the Oswald Chronicles. This is my own personal project that I've been working on. I've worked with a number of artists. The primary artist on this is a young lady by the name of Jade Gonzalez, fantastic artist. She's from Chile. Both of these covers are by her. Now, if you were to go to my website, theoswaldchronicles.com, you can see the book. We post it up. We post Monday through Friday. We also, but the pages on there are black and white. What I'm going to show you here today, here's the first issue in the series, and this is in color. What we're working towards is hopefully getting the entire series done in color. When I originally started doing comics, which was in the early 90s, I'm dating myself, I know, but I've been around for a while, so it is what it is. But when I first started, a big dream of ours was to do stuff in color. The only thing holding us back now is just the expense of getting it colored. This particular book, this particular series, is being colored by David Montoya. Actually, you can see his name right there on the credits. There's Jade. Is my name, JD Calderon, and this is the exact same work that's actually up on the site. It's just this is in color. I've actually since I've published this, I've actually gone back and touched up the lettering, which it kind of makes me laugh, because I had actually submitted these to Alterna Comics, and we got passed by it. But one of the things that I'm actually appreciative that Peter Samedi had suggested was work on the lettering, and that's something that I did. And it's not reflective in this because these aren't the new pages. The coloring is the same, and we did change some of the coloring. But the story looks pretty good. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, we have this is the first issue in the series, my first day, and we have Oswald writing at a later date about his life and how he remembers first remembering how he came into awareness. He's the only mouse in the world who has conscious thought, so it was strange for him to grow up and to realize that he's different than his brethren, that he's alone in the world, and he has more in common with the humans, and watching TV, and then he eventually has to fight off his own kind, and then he introduces himself to a young girl who becomes his friend, and then she ends up teaching him. She teaches him how to read and how to write and how to do arithmetic, and play the piano. The young girl in the story is ill, and he goes on during his nightly little tours, and he, likes to watch TV. One night he comes back and he finds all these strange little beings on the young lady, not knowing what they're doing, and they're obviously doing something to her. And Oswald's always been a little fighter, so he jumps down there and he tries to scare them off, The little girl sees him, but for some reason she can't see them, and he has her throw her teddy bear. And it mushes a couple of them and, sends them scattering. And then the next day, she gives him a present and she presents him with his signature bow tie, which is one of the reasons why he always has one. It's because of this young lady. As we continue, we have a congregation of these beings, and they present themselves to him, and they're quite respectful of him because they have an idea, an inkling of what he may be, but they don't know for certain. And they give him a warning, a very firm one. They present him with a dead mouse. They're letting him know, it says, this is serious. You can't get involved in our world. You can't get involved with what we're doing. And, Oswald's sad, and he takes the body and removes it. He wants to make sure the young girl doesn't see her. Her name is Sally. And she is very ill, as you can see. And he warns them. He says, listen, I'm not going to give up. You need to, stop doing whatever it is you're doing. He says, you're just making her worse. And, the leader of these guys, he has magic. Oswald goes to attack him, and, he just bounces off. There's nothing he can do, So he runs off, gets the girl's mother, and, enrages her that some mouse is running around, and she chases him into the room, and, she swats away these little guys. The little girl is very concerned, asking him, hey, why'd you do that? Why'd you wake up my mother? And Oswald lets her know about the story about what these little guys are doing. And she pulls out a book to try to find out what they are, and they find out they're little goblins, The little girl is ill. The mother goes through the whole thing. It's very sad. Oswald and her talk, and they have several tender moments. And then eventually, the goblins, true to their word, they come back. And they present him with a pile of dead mice, and they're like, look, this is for real. We're not playing around. And Oswald tries to, do what he did before, wake the little girl. But this time they're ready for him. They have a group of sorcerers, and they contain him, and they hold him. And the little, and Oswald, he can't fight it. And the little girl is gone at the end of it, and he runs off. It's kind of sad, but that's his beginning, Then we go into the second issue, and this first issue is called My First Day. The strangest thing about this comic is that when I initially started the series, I didn't start from the beginning. I started from, I would say probably, at this point, probably about 14, 15 issues in of story. So it didn't start at the beginning. I wrote this probably good 10 years after I started the series. I just knew it had to be done. I knew I had to write this story. It says, I had to present how, his life started. And that started me on a track of trying to make the series continuous, because one of the things I've done, and I'm still doing, is I would jump around in his history. And I would, write a certain portion and come back and write another certain portion and write an earlier period, a later period, a middle period. He has basically three portions of his life. He has his first life, he has his second life, which he lives in dream. He has his third life, which is when he's resurrected. So he has these three portions of his life, which are very clear and very distinct. This obviously is his very first life. This is when he's very young. He doesn't. He's not so much unsophisticated, but he is very young. He doesn't know anything. He's not much different than, let's say, a 14 or 15-year-old kid, maybe even younger. The only thing is that he's very bright. He learns very fast. We know that the way he's learning, he learns at a much faster pace than anyone else. It's preternatural the way he learns. So he can study languages and pick them up very quickly. It's one of the reasons why he eventually picks up magic very, very quickly. He learns at an incredible rate. And then eventually when he does go full bore into it, he seeks out basically every scrap of knowledge he can get his hands on. This is the second issue. And this is Passing Queens and Making Homes. And it starts off with Oswald probably not much too far after the point where Sally has passed and he's walking through Manhattan. He's homeless and he's just going through the city, and this is wonderfully colored by David Montoya and wonderfully illustrated by Jade Gonzalez, as he travels through Manhattan and he's going through, various homes trying to find out, keep himself alive, and then he sees some of these other creatures that he saw. These are not goblins, they're a little different, and he sees some fairies and things, and trolls and ogres and such, and you have some red caps, and he's just like, what are these creatures, and what are they? And he's trying to avoid the cats, and, he's going through his day, and he's like, oh man, this is really rough. And then these two come running down out of nowhere, and they run into him, and then they're being chased and chased by these guys, and there are a few orcs, and Oswald's like, hey, I don't want any part of those guys. So he turns around and he runs. He outpaces them. He sees a crack in the wall, he just jumps right in there, and they follow him in there, and he's like, who are these guys? And there's this little girl, and she introduces herself, and her name's Alicia, and she introduces her brother, Jones. It's kind of sad I don't remember all the names, but I wrote the story a while ago. So, and I run Oswald as the main focus, and there are only a few main characters. These characters, they're around for the duration of the story, but they cycle out. Kind of like think of them as coworkers in your life. When you're at a job, you may experience a person for a year or two, and spend not so much intimate time with them, but you do spend some time with them. You may be at a job and work closely with an individual while you're at the job, and then one day either you leave or they leave, and it's kind of like that. So these characters do cycle in and out. And then they get to talking, they're just like, what's going on, so on and so forth. And they tell Oswald about their story, and they show him this crystal that they have. It was like, we have this thing, and, we don't know what it is and what it can do. And he gets it in his hand, and he has a vision of his future. And these are various stories that have already been illustrated by Jade Gonzalez. She's actually working on this one. This is Dauphin. He comes up much later. But this is a Kickstarter I did a while, just not too long ago. This is Diane, and this is Malekith, evil sorcerer who did all this madness in the story. This is the Kickstarter that's actually currently running right now. This is Clive, and this is from my time with Clive. When Oswald's in Dream, quite a bit older, he was eventually becomes an emperor. He becomes the emperor of this race called the Mar, and they're a collection of people, a race that can actually transform themselves. And what they do is when they dedicate themselves to their new emperor or their new king or their new ruler, they become like them. So if their new ruler is blue and has 3 heads and 4 arms, they will transform, and all of them will have those characteristics. So they all transform into mice. So we end up with this race of mice like Oswald. This one down here is from a story called On the Wings of Deidre. So, this is a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun because these are stories that Jade and I had already worked on. These stories they're already done. Except, Dauphin has appeared in some other stories, but we're currently working on his first appearance when Oswald first meets him, which I had written in prose a while ago, and I recently translated into comic form for Jade, and she's working on that. But as we continue, these orc guys, they're not stupid. They see this shining light coming out of this crack, and they're like, hey, they're in there. It's not that, it's kind of obvious. And the two little guys he's with, they're kobolds, actually. It's kind of funny because when I was putting this story together, I was like, oh, I'll have kobolds and orcs, right? And when I originally came up with it, orcs were always, my understanding is always kind of like, they were kind of like pigs, boar-like, and kobolds were kind of dog-like. And then I think when I presented it with Jade, I would say dog-like and pig-like, and that's what I wrote to her and I sent to her, and she took it very literally, and with her designs. And so, they're very kind of dog-like and very kind of pig-like, or boar-like, and I just think it's hilarious. What's funny is that in the creation of when I work with an artist, I try to give them as much latitude as possible when it comes down to story. I tend to write a fairly complete script. The only thing is it's kind of loose in the sense that I don't do panel by panel breakdowns. I think that's ridiculous. I let the artist break it down. But I have all of the dialogue there, and I have I tend to put in all of the physical, emotional responses. So I'll let them know, if a person's saying a line, whether or not they're smiling or they're grinning, and what their emotional response is, the type of look I want on their face. That's important to me because I was very much around during the 90s when you would have certain artists, primarily the guys over at Image. A lot of people blame Rob Liefeld, but you saw it a lot from Jim Lee, and those are my parakeets. And what one of the characteristics that they would do that I always found disturbing was they would have people grimacing with their teeth just like clutched together, and then you'd have a word balloon and they'd be saying something, and I'm like, nobody talks like that. I mean, if you have your mouth open and you're screaming, I mean, obviously, but nobody clutches their teeth and then starts speaking. I mean, you could try it, you could probably get a few words, you're not going to sit there and say whole sentences and stuff, so it's just always ridiculous. So I've always made it a point to show characters emoting. It's very important to me that they emote. Well, here we go. These orcs, they capture the two kobold kids, and they grab Oswald, and Oswald's a biter, so he doesn't have many offensive weapons at this point, so biting is definitely in his repertoire, and he will bite anyone. And so he bites the boar, and he takes off, and he goes down into this drain, and they can't get to him. And they're like, oh, whatever, he's just a mouse. And then we transition over, and this is Diane, and she's meeting up with her uncle, and they're discussing her service in the chapter of what they call the Guardians, and how it's a huge honor for her to be even involved with it, and it's a huge honor for her family. The two of them are having basically an argument over it. He smacks her to illustrate the point that, look, this is real. You cannot deny this. You have to go forward with this. Now, some people would say, oh, this is not cool or whatever. And I agree with that to some degree. But Diane is not a child. She is on par, probably a couple thousand years old. She's a fairy. She's been around for a long time. Her uncle is even older. So within the mythos of the story that I have, or the world that I'm working, the Fae have been they were cast out of heaven. Well, actually, they weren't cast out. They had left heaven when the war broke out between Lucifer and heaven, or God. And the Fae, who were servants, left heaven because they didn't want to get involved. Now, after the war, when Lucifer lost, he was cast out, they were barred from returning. So due to this, they're stuck on Earth. So they didn't go to hell, but they're on Earth. And one of the things that they're trying to achieve is to get back into God's good graces. Or at least that's the Seelie court, and then you have the Unseelie court, which is just working on the opposite end, and they're a bit more corrupt, and their thing isn't about getting into God's good graces and going to heaven, but more like smashing the gates down and just wrecking the place because they're denied it. So that's the Unseelie court, but that's a whole background story that I only touch upon lightly throughout the entire series. I do talk about it throughout the entire series. But, we have the uncle illustrating. He says, hey, you got to take this seriously. Diane understands. Both of them are very old school. If she really had a problem with her uncle striking her, trust me, it would have been a huge fist fight, if not a sword fight. And then she's resigned to her fate, so she goes like, okay, fine. Then we go back to Oswald, and he goes to his little drain. He finds himself in this place, and he's wondering, to himself, how easy would it be to introduce myself to this child and just forget about these two kids he just ran into. And he's like, no, I can't do that. I've already met these two, and I kind of care for them. Then we have the cat attack him, so that kind of made the choice kind of easy. And then, he gets out the window, lands on some guy's head. And then he's following the scent of the orcs. Orcs like to wear perfume, so these are very gentlemanly type of orc. They like to dress well, and they like to smell good. Then we transition again to another theme of trolls. Now, trolls are having a test for Ordith. And Ordith passed the test, and he's got what's called a shadow. It's a huge honor within their culture to get a shadow. And he is also a guardian. Now, the guardians represent two sides. It represents the Unseelie and the Seelie. So you have the light and the dark. And that's Ordith represents the dark, and Diane represents the light. So that's that. And then we again transition to another character. And this is the Orc Queen. And you see her here, casting a spell. And you see her casting a vision for her daughter, where the orcs rise up and take over the human world. And they take over, they do something. There's that's just not allowed. There's a compact between the Fae and the humans, with secret societies that that allow the Fae to have their own control as long as they stay out of sight and stay out of mind, and they don't bother the general populace. There will be no war. But this queen, she has aspirations. She's a very powerful sorceress, so she feels this is something she could do. She's presented with these orcs who bring her the two children. Two children stole the stone from her, and they also escaped from her. Now, one of the things they had done, and I didn't even go over it, was that where is it? Ah, here it is. She gives Oswald the stone, which he hides in his tie. Sometimes he'll hide things in it. Sometimes paper. Sometimes it's little things like that. And so she wants the stone back. They're very powerful artifacts of magic. Oswald being in tune with magic, he, just by him coming into his presence, touching it, coming into contact with it, it starts to manifest his powers and his abilities, and also the abilities of the stone. As you, the queen is actually quite a mean woman. She, as you can see, she rips out the hair of the little girl's head, and they imprison the kids, and they go forward, and the mother is the daughter is imploring the mother, says, don't do this. She's gonna go have a good time with some of these orcs. And then Oswald's like looking around. He's like, we transition back to him, and he's just like, hey, what's going on? I can smell that these guys went this way, but then he doesn't know what's going on. And then he sees a stone glowing, and he sees this doorway open up, and then he opens up, and then boom, and this is where it ends. And it's just this scene of the orc guard, it's like spotting him, and it's to be continued. And that's just to give everyone an oversight of the Oswald Chronicles and what I'm trying to do with it. And, it's something I'm having fun with. And then, like I said, we have a Kickstarter running, and it's for My Time with Clive. These books are also available if you wanted to pick them up. So please, subscribe. Let everyone know about this. Hit like on the menu, and thank you so much. And I'll be talking to you again tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll have another review of another book. Maybe I'll discuss Oswald, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll talk about some other things. There's scads, tons more. I can continue talking about the character and the world and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's it for now. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. JD out.